our oceans, the climate, and clearing up some of the common things we hear online to understand everything better. That is today's show. You'll know that if you listen to the show live, every month we have low tox partners that help you with your swaps or stock ups, depending on what you might need right now. Check out the Weleda and Oz Climate offers below. These two are for Aussie residents. Enjoy. Matt, hello. How are you?
Hi, Alex. Great to be here with you.
Oh, I love a good Friday afternoon date to save the world. Now, first question, I'm just going to jump straight in. Oceans, climate. Obviously, there was a science passion as a younger man. How did you end up doing what you do today on this global scale?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's a circuitous journey I had. I actually went to university a while back, years ago, and when I was there, I was studying a bunch of different subjects, including maths and physics. And I was probably headed to actually quite a mathematical degree, possibly going into academia in maths. But I felt this disconnect between the mathematical world and the real world, and I was just craving for some way to apply the mathematical knowledge and techniques to something more real world. And just by pure accident, I was flicking through the handbook one day at the University of Sydney, and there was a picture of a wave, an amazing wave of a surfer in a barrel. And I thought, these handbooks are usually just reams of a phone book almost, details of courses with no nothing to really grab your attention. So this course in physical oceanography drew my attention, and it combined physics and maths with a study of the real world. So that's how I discovered oceanography, kind of by accident. But it was also out of a passion that I have for the oceans. I love swimming and surfing in the oceans. I've always loved, marine life and understanding the ocean. So it's a combination of the courses I was doing at university with this passion I have about understanding the oceans and how they work.
And then where did climate change come into view?
Yeah, I mean, climate change basically hijacked my profession, if I can put
Mm,
it that way. When I started in around 89, 1990, that was the first couple of years of my PhD. And in 1990, we had the first Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report come out. And that was back at a time when already scientists knew greenhouse gases were going up way too quickly, and it was going to change our climate system. And very quickly, the field of oceanography that I was so drawn to, which is basically understanding ocean currents and circulation, how it affects our weather patterns. I say hijacked because no scientist ever sort of wanted this to happen. We didn't sort of create a field of research because we wanted, wanted to
you weren't
study.
trying to monetize a
No,
new, yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
totally. Mm,
It's like, it's like the profession. People who studied lung health just got taken over by looking at the
mm.
health impacts of smoking. Oceanographers worldwide suddenly had to take account of this massive sledgehammer that we were taking to our climate system. We were actually loading the atmosphere up with greenhouse gases to such an extent that the world was warming so quickly that the oceans were also warming quickly. And that was changing ocean circulation, changing climate patterns, changing sea levels, and impacting ecosystems in a way that even back in the 90s, a lot of researchers needed to start taking that into account. Fast forward to today, and it is the biggest change to our oceans ever recorded.
Mm. And when did you see, given you were studying it when climate took over oceanography, when did you see politics try to get involved?
Pretty early on,
Mm,
because unfortunately, there's a big perception that climate change action was going to you know, take down economies or mean changes to people's lifestyles. And actually nothing could be further from the truth. The action on climate change creates new economies, it creates growth in jobs. If we sit on our hands and just do nothing different, with no technological innovation, you don't grow an economy that way. You grow it by finding new ways to do things. That's, developing an electrified vehicle fleet. It's by going to solar and wind and battery storage to create energy free of pollution, free of greenhouse gases. So all these things that we can do to stop climate change actually benefit the economy, they benefit human health, it was the lobby group actually of the fossil fuel sector that wanted to extend their time in the sun. Uh, Clearly, a lot of money's been made of digging up coal, oil, and gas and burning it.
Mm.
But those companies need to wind down or change over to renewables to stop climate change. And we already know that solar is way cheaper than coal for producing energy. So even if they don't believe in climate change and don't believe climate change is real, which is a complete fallacy that they don't believe it, but even if they don't believe there's any need for action, the economics of it are such that we just go to solar and battery storage.
Mm. I've got a lot to unpack there, but I want to just quickly jump in with don't believe it's real because I think we have to go there, obviously. Something I hear a lot now, climate change is a natural cycle. We are just in a natural cycle. And I can imagine that would probably invoke something quite strong in a person who's made their life's work to try and study, warn, put up red flags and alarms, however and wherever possible to get as much action happening as possible.
Yeah.
What is the best way to actually describe why that statement is not complete or
Yeah.
untrue?
No, it's a good question. And we talk about a lot of aspects of natural climate variability, like a volcano erupts, it can cool the planet for a couple of years. There are solar cycles, lots of reasons the climate varies from year to year. But there's nothing natural about our perturbation, our change in the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So
Mm.
our atmosphere had a certain amount of greenhouse gases sitting there in the atmosphere, keeping our planet very habitable. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've absolutely burnt trillions of tons, actually. Well, we're getting towards the trillionth ton of carbon dioxide.
Yeah,
And so that's a very unnatural human-induced change to the climate system. So the first thing I'll say is there's nothing natural about this variation. It's a human-caused perturbation, interference of our climate system.
got it. Yeah.
Sometimes people say, well, how can that happen? We're just a small part of we're not, how can we change atmospheric conditions? Well, we did that
It's
with the,
true. We often
yeah,
hear, like, how
yeah,
could man possibly believe that our actions were that important, that we
exactly.
have this huge impact?
Yeah, and we know we do because concentration of greenhouse gases is already, plus 40% and growing what it was naturally before we started burning fossil fuels. But also we know
Mm.
from things like ozone, different chemical, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons destroyed the ozone hole. We saw it with our eyes. It's threatening to life on Earth. We solved that problem. So we know from other other gases like in this case ozone and CFCs, we certainly can change atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse of gases. We did it with ozone. We're doing it with greenhouse gases. But I want to come back to this idea that the Earth's climate varies naturally. It does, but there's nothing reassuring about that. And what I mean is, if you go back through Earth's history, we can see examples where the Earth's orbital motion or axis tilted so subtly, and that can drive the difference between an ice age and what we call an interglacial, which we're in at the moment with
Mm.
not in an ice age. So very slight perturbations in the planetary orbit can change our climate at a vast level. There is nothing reassuring about looking back in Earth's climate history and seeing examples where we just tilt something a little bit and get a big climate response. And the reason I say that is that our greenhouse gas perturbation right now, what we're doing to the climate system at the moment is akin to a sledgehammer of our climate. Those orbital cycles I spoke about in the Milankovitch cycles, uh, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands in Earth's history, that's like tapping the Earth with a tiny little slap of your
A little
hand.
triangle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a very gentle push, and those orbital cycle changes were subtle enough in magnitude, but big enough to rearrange our climate. So Earth's climate history actually tells us there are ways that the Earth's climate changes in a very significant way to any perturbation, whether it's an orbital cycle or in this case, greenhouse gases. So there's nothing comforting about seeing those big changes. In fact, it tells us that the Earth's climate has these ways where tipping points can be breached and new climate regimes emerge. And that's why scientists are concerned. We look back in Earth's climate history, and a lot of paleoclimatologists in that field, they're phenomenally important to understanding future climate change because we can go back and look at times when Earth's greenhouse gases were higher than today even, and we can see where we're going to go to. Just back to that past climate, the very communities that run future projections in models, we go take those models back to Earth's climate past, and we simulate basically what conditions would have been like during these elevated CO2 eras in the past. And it's a very important way to understand the system.
Right. So are you saying, Matt, that we are not in some sort of tilt at the moment? And that is how we know?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So we know from, the astrophysicists can tell us about Earth's orbital. There's nothing happening there that would be causing the changes we're seeing. Yeah, we know we're not in a tilt at the moment because the astrophysicists, tell us that the Earth's orbit, there's no big changes going on there. There's no big changes with solar radiation. In fact, the solar, just whilst the global warming was really picking up, if anything, the solar radiation amounts were going down slightly. So we know that, in terms of a medical diagnosis of Earth's changing temperatures, every single thing that we look at that could influence global temperatures, none of that can account for our warming. The only one that does is the changes in greenhouse gases. So it's a bit of a
Wow. Okay. So what does that body of research look like that helps scientists know the difference?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It includes solar physicists who tell us about the solar radiation amounts, volcanologists who can track volcanic eruptions, as I said, orbital physicists who understand Earth's orbit and rotation around the Earth, all these things that can affect climate naturally. All of them have been shown to have negligible or the opposite sign effect. That's to say, solar radiation declining at a time when global warming is picking up. So there are lots of ways the Earth's climate varies naturally. El Nino is another example, but we look at all of the different factors, and the only one that can explain the warming of the last 50 years is our increase in greenhouse gases. And what's more, that increase in greenhouse gases perfectly matches, like if the projections from the 1960s of where warming would get to are actually right on the money. They predicted this about degree Celsius warming up to a few years ago. We're already up to 1.5 now. It's really rapid. I mean, I've been giving talks about climate for long enough to almost have to each time recalibrate the warming amount I talk about, or the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So things are now changing more rapidly today even than they were 20 years ago.
Wow. Okay. And so, how does it make you feel when you say every 5 years they say it's going to be all done, or Manhattan's going to be underwater and it hasn't happened yet? Like,
Yeah,
I just feel like people are having unqualified and unguided by any kind of qualification conversations online with how our tech algorithms draw us onto these devices and keep us there. So
yeah,
it's honestly just a cesspool of blind leading the blind on
yeah. No,
extremes of left and right, right? Like, when you're not
yeah,
having guided conversations or seeing like debates from people who are experts, it can land us in these places where I sometimes see comments and I think, gosh, that's it's it's so misguided. But how do we reach those people?
yeah.
You must get
Look,
frustrated.
it's really frustrating. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and unfortunately, you can cobble together a diagram completely based on fictitious data and say, "Here's this diagram showing something," and we're seeing all sorts of trickery and straight out lies about basic climate physics. Look, unfortunately, this misinformation hasn't gone away. I thought
Mm,
as time progresses and we see more and more of these extreme climate events, severe bushfires, flooding rains, catastrophic impacts on ecosystems. Coral bleaching is just absolutely uh, pervasive around the world. We're losing our corals before our eyes. These should be things that people kind of go, hey, I've got to rethink this prejudiced view I have about climate physics. I'm not quite getting this the right, I need to go and recalibrate my view. I don't understand whether it's people with their head in the sand, or that as we get towards more and more inevitable action on climate change, the
mm,
communities that are trying to stop that change in how we produce energy, they're just becoming more active in their misinformation. So
Mm. Hey, speaking of misinformation, there is something I want to bring up, which is something that absolutely gobsmacked me when I saw the short of it shared from the biggest podcast in the world, Joe Rogan's podcast, and he was interviewing Mel Gibson. Look, I was a fan of Lethal Weapon in the 80s, like sue me, but
Mad Max and whatever.
yeah, right. To see the explainer of, well, all this ice melting crap, if I put ice in a glass, do you see the ice making the glass, what was it, flow over?
Yeah.
And just I'm no scientist, but I definitely know that that is not the issue we're dealing with when it comes to ice melting and sea levels rising. As a career oceanographer and climate scientist who loves the oceans, wants them to stick around, please take us through it. What should we
Yeah.
really be hearing by the
Yeah. No.
millions worldwide on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, ice melt is a really big part of the glaciology community right now, and the biggest concern is the ice sheets that sit over the Antarctic continent or the Antarctic landmass. There's a big slab of ice sitting on that land, and that's melting alarmingly quickly into the ocean. Same for Greenland. So those two ice sheets are very big concerns for us. Now, the best thing to do, back to that glass of water and ice, is get a glass of water, fill it up to near the top within a few millimeters. Just don't have it overflow, but fill it near the top. That's your ocean. That's your ocean today, say, before climate, or the ocean 50 years ago before climate change started kicking in. Now grab your ice cube from the fridge and drop that ice cube in. That's like an iceberg carving off these ice sheets around Greenland and Antarctica and flowing into the ocean. When that ice comes off the land and goes into the ocean, it raises sea levels. It's just unambiguous physics. And when you drop your ice cube in, you'll see the water flow over. So yeah, I don't know.
So the icebergs that are in the sea already, they're floating, right? And that's why they're not weighing the water down. How are they
Exactly.
floating?
Yeah. So this, yeah, basically, we have ice on land that raises sea levels when it melts. Ice that's already in the water. So if there's an iceberg floating around in the water, that's already done. It's the raising of sea levels due to that iceberg happens at the point when the iceberg calves and crashes into the ocean. So everybody
Mm-hmm.
would have seen these amazing videos of iceberg carving. You see
Yeah.
the iceberg carve off, crashes into the ocean, creates a big wave. At that point in time, you raise the sea level. Once the iceberg floats away and melts, there's no extra sea level raised
Mm-hmm.
after that moment. But like I said, grab an ice cube and drop it in. That's your iceberg carving moment, and it raises sea levels.
So
Um,
is that the loophole that Mel found in that
exactly.
kind of, okay.
Well, the other way to put it is different experiment. Put your ice cubes into the glass with no water, add your water. When the ice in that glass melts, it won't raise the glass's water level because it's already displaced the water by being there to start with. But the ice isn't sitting in the middle of the ocean and emerging as an iceberg. The ice becomes an iceberg at the point of calving, and that's when sea levels are raised. So it's nonsensical stuff to me because, we know that when you take ice off the land and add it to the ocean, it raises sea levels. I'll tell you another fun fact about our Earth's history. Go back to an ice age. Last glacial maximums about 18, 19,000 years ago, not long ago. Indigenous people were wandering the Australian landmass, for the last 50, 60,000 years. They were there through this last ice age. And all around Australia, sea level, guess where sea level was when it was the last glacial maximum? It was 120 meters lower than today because all of the ocean that we have today, a whole lot of that water in the oceans today was locked up in ice sheets over North America, Antarctica, Greenland, northern parts of Europe. 3 kilometer slabs of ice during that ice age. So basically, the best way to think of this is during an ice age, sea levels drop down significantly and the ice sheets build up. During an interglacial, the opposite happens. The ice sheets melt and sea levels raise up in response. So it's basic physics to have this interplay between how much ice is stored on land and how much of a sea level we have, what level of sea we have. So, we got into some extra glaciology there,
Oh,
but
I love a bit of extra nerding out on
yeah,
glaciers. Why
key
not?
the
Yeah.
key thing is just back to that terrible moment for poor Mel where he got it all so wrong. Just grab a glass of water and add your ice cube to it, and that's what happens when Antarctica sheds an iceberg, or Greenland does. When it comes off the land into the water, you see the crashing wave. Sea level is raised by those iceberg carving. Now, one iceberg carving is not going to cause a problem, but when you accelerate the amount of icebergs carving each summer in both hemispheres, we are raising sea levels, and we're expecting that to get even higher over the coming years.
Yeah. And let's now talk about the implication of raised sea levels, and I know also raised temperature of the oceans. Which one do we want to tackle first?
We could start with temperature in a way, because
Let's
it
do
leads
it.
to the raised sea levels. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, globally, ocean temperatures are increasing everywhere, pretty much from the surface into the interior. There are little patches occasionally that'll be a bit cooler than average, but if you looked at the temperature data decade by decade, progressively we've been warming the oceans. Um, some patches a bit faster than others, but there's been a progressive warming of our oceans. That's just the oceans absorbing this heat that's been trapped by greenhouse gases. And in a way, that's a good thing, because we are living on a planet and we're living on the land in the atmosphere effectively. We're not living in the ocean. So you could
Mm.
sort of think this is great news. We're seeing heat that's trapped from greenhouse gases taken into the ocean away from where we live and breathe.
Yeah.
The problem is that when you take that heat into the ocean, whilst you remove it from the atmosphere, you do a whole bunch of things that are not good. One is to raise. Yeah. So yeah, when this heat gets into the ocean, it's not a good thing. It does take heat out of the atmosphere effectively, but firstly it re-radiates that heat back into the atmosphere anyway. So it's sort of sitting there as a warm sort of radiation source for the atmosphere. But there's a whole bunch of repercussions that are not good for humans or ecosystems. One is it raises sea levels, which obviously impacts our coastlines, and in time will displacement of many, many millions of people worldwide. Um, on top of sea level rise, there's also ecosystem changes. So corals get bleached. We see fish population stressed, and even aquaculture, where we're trying to grow fish for human consumption, that can be impacted severely. You have huge loss of fish for marine heat waves that can occur. So there's a lot of damage to marine ecosystems, naturally coral reefs, but also in some of these aquaculture farms that are developed to provide food. Um, on top
Can,
of
can I ask before you go into the next bit? So, is the ocean trying to be part of a homeostasis kind of a mechanism to take it out of the atmosphere from us, the greenhouse gases, initially, but
well,
it's actually just that there's too much for it to
there
absorb?
there is a bit of there's a way that the ocean atmosphere equilibrate with respect to each other. So if the atmosphere gets too hot, the ocean will want to absorb that heat. If the atmosphere
Mm.
gets too much carbon in it, the ocean will try to absorb that carbon dioxide. So I don't know the homeostatic
Yeah,
analogy
it sounds
too
like it's got
too well.
this protective mechanism, but it's actually being overloaded.
There is a
Mm.
way that the climate system tries to equilibrate out its energy and its content of carbon. So if you add heat to the ocean, for example, it'll tend to want to release this heat into the atmosphere. If you add heat to the atmosphere, it'll tend to want to put it into the ocean. So there is a coupling between the ocean and the atmosphere when it comes to heat and also greenhouse gases. So that's why
Mm.
the oceans are acidifying, because we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and the oceans are going, hang on a second, the amount of carbon dioxide we've got dissolved at the moment doesn't match what the atmosphere has. We'll dissolve more. Um, so yeah, there is a tendency for the ocean atmosphere to equilibrate as a system. But yeah, the list of negative impacts from heating is unfortunately a long one, because you also melt the ice caps, which we spoke about
Mm.
a minute ago. And you also make the atmosphere more humid because this extra warmth in the ocean evaporates moisture. And we know we're heading up towards 10% extra humidity on average globally, because of extra ocean warming. And that doesn't sound like much, maybe, but remember the scale only goes,
Oh, it sounds like a lot for
yeah,
people who are trying to avoid mold in, especially in
yeah.
the East Coast.
We don't want, I mean, yeah, Northern Australia, East Coast, Sydney suffered incredible humidity a couple of summers ago. This last summer wasn't quite as bad, but globally we're seeing increases in humidity, in moisture content. You're right, that creates human health issues, mold. It also stresses humans to be in a heat wave with moist, humid air. I think everybody who knows that experience of coming out on a muggy day, the temperature might only be 30 degrees, which, for a lot of people is not as bad as a 40-degree heat wave, but that heat and humidity combination is what's lethal to
Mm.
human health. So that humidity effect is unfortunately a real threat to society. On top of that, when you make the atmosphere more humid, when we have these severe rainfall events, these very short flash flooding events, we've seen plenty of them in Australia, but also you can see on YouTube these floods that have been in Spain and Germany and Japan. I
Mm.
mean, where suddenly you have a river crashing down a mountainside, taking out cars and buildings and people. I mean, these flash flooding events, the chances of them occurring are just stacked so much higher when we have a more humid atmosphere as we do now. So, that list, I think I got through most of the main bad
Most of
impacts,
the
but
doom and gloom. Yeah.
yeah,
And so just so that I'm super clear, because I can imagine everyone's wanting to be super clear, what I'm hearing is as the ocean gets warmer, precipitation increases, puts more humidity in the atmosphere, creates more congestion, if you like, in the way clouds are formed, which means when it does rain, we don't get like pitter patter kind of think English rain for a few weeks and it's just in and out. We get full on rain bombs. And that's how the rain bomb term has now started to take
yeah,
sort of a bit of space
no,
in
exactly.
descriptions.
So in some sense, I like it varies from place to place, but we see the one of the big changes we see are these flash flooding events becoming more frequent.
Mm.
They're sometimes called atmospheric rivers. A whole stream of very moist air can sort of move across through a system and dump a huge amount of rainfall. I mean, we saw Cyclone Alfred, dumping rainfall. We've also had East Coast lows that have been, high in precipitation and other events. Some of the flooding rains up in North Queensland are great examples of what we expect to see more of. I should say, though, one of the things that happens with global warming is this intensified hydrological cycle. So it's not like everywhere gets rainier by more. You actually see, by and large, the tropics getting wetter, and the latitudes where we have deserts and dry regions tend to get drier. So we sort of speak about it, the rich gets richer paradigm. The wet gets wetter and the dry gets drier. So Earth's climate is characterized by high rainfall in the tropics. Then at the latitudes of the Sahara and Australia's deserts, about 30 south, you have largely descending air, drier air, desert-like conditions. And then at higher latitudes, you get another band of rainfall up around 60 north and 60 south. So there's these bands of high rainfall and deserts and high rainfall across Earth's, and then right up in Antarctica, it becomes dry again. So that's just to do with atmospheric circulation. Unfortunately, when we energize the system with greenhouse gases, those rainfall bands become more intense. So the tropics, even wetter, even more sort of flooding rain events, and we tend to see some more severe droughts. And so, I mean, so California, for example, partly driven by a triple La Nina, but they've had incredible drought and dry spells. So it's that energizing of our hydrological cycle is super dangerous because you
Mm.
can, and we've seen it in Australia a bit. You sort of have feast or famine with rainfall. You can have summers where everything gets regrown, and then a couple of years later, a severe drought, everything dries out, and you get severe bushfires.
And it is part of the warming of the oceans why our rainfall is shifting to be more coastal and our tropics are actually extending further south. Because I remember being a kid in Sydney, I would not have called Sydney tropical.
Yeah.
But now
No, that's right. It's a really
I
good
really
question.
do feel like we're headed that way.
We call it sort of, there's even a word for it now, tropicalization. We're
Mm.
seeing the tropics effectively expand. I mean, the oceans, really warm, excuse me, warm pools of water are expanding towards the poles. So the tropics are expanding in the oceans, but also in the atmosphere. We're seeing a greater region of, humid, those summer humid temperatures that used to be, just Brisbane and north. It's really coming down the coast much further.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a joke before I knew just how bad it was. That was like, maybe it's menopause, maybe it's February when you're in
Right.
Sydney, like the hot flushes and the
Yeah,
sweats
right.
and
Yeah.
everything. But now
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh no, this has settled in to be a new climate. February and right up through to the second, third week of March now.
Yeah.
It's so often over 80%, sometimes
Yeah. No.
85. It's crazy.
Yeah. Sydney and our humidity will only tend to get, worse as time goes on. But
Mm,
I think of our seasonal cycle. I mean, as a kid, summer was the season of choice. We loved it. The long days, daylight saving, you're off school, but also beautiful weather and
mm.
lovely days to go to the beach. And I think nowadays summer is not the season of choice. You sort of get to autumn, and go, that's fantastic. We've got
Yeah, yeah, I
finally
agree.
some cooler overnight temperatures, a bit of warmth during the day, but not that sort of muggy, humid conditions. And yeah.
Mm. Okay, so that is uh, that's a lot to take in because now we know much more clearly how the mechanism of human impact, climate change, is affecting us. We know what it means to have these warmer oceans in terms of how rain falls, when, and how intensively, and then how that impacts inland in terms of it getting drier and drier. Is there a good news story here anywhere, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best news story is that we don't have to invent new things to solve this problem.
Mm,
We've got, and Australia is incredibly lucky. We've got solar energy in abundance, and we've got amazing technologies now to store that energy. And we've also got wind that complements. I mean, generally, excuse me, generally a windy day, when cloud sets in and it becomes rainy and the solar energy declines a bit, that's when you tend to get windier conditions. So between wind and solar and battery storage. So yeah, battery and between storage of the power itself and the renewables we have, it's a very easy problem to solve. Even globally, even nations that have not a lot of land area can. There's new technologies to put wind farms offshore, and you do the studies to make sure they don't affect marine ecosystems, but honestly, it's a much lesser impact to have these structures out there sitting in the ocean delivering power than it is to have ongoing unmitigated global warming with temperatures going through the roof. So
mm.
a
And do we
good
have decent science on wind farm impact on sea ecosystems?
Yeah, well, I'm part of a Senate proposal at the moment. We're writing to put together a science team to deliver that because at the moment there's not every single proposed wind farm should go through a process of putting the wind farms in there, looking at how sediment transport's affected,
Mm,
how ecosystems are affected. But we do know just from basic understanding of how ocean currents work that those structures have minimal impact compared to ongoing climate change. So it's a much better situation to have wind farms out there producing power than it
mm.
is to let the oceans proceed with this ongoing warming.
Yeah. Okay. So, is the reason sometimes things don't go through a process and why you're putting together that team, is that because, and I don't mean to be controversial with this statement at all, but it is a concern I have often when I'm a concerned person thinking, are we doing this in a just way? Are we thinking of everything before we decide what we move on to? Um, do you worry about how quickly um, climate change solutions are capitalized on?
In a way, they're overall not capitalized on quickly enough. A couple of years ago,
Mm,
when one of the big companies that produces fossil fuels, I think it was AGL, wanted to turn a coal-fired power station into a solar farm because there was all the infrastructure there, right? All the tools to take the power from the burning coal, put the solar panels there, and you can still get all the infrastructure to take that energy out to the grid was there. So
mm.
tremendously cost effective. They wanted to do this to make money. Okay.
Wow.
There was also going to be a benefit to reducing emissions.
And to the workers in
Yeah,
that
exactly.
town,
Yeah,
it's
they
much
save their
healthier.
jobs.
Mm,
Exactly. Oh yeah, and better air quality, 100%.
mm.
So many benefits, and the Prime Minister at the time, Scott Morrison, actually did his best to stop that going ahead, which is just mind-numbingly stupid politics
That's
from my side.
bizarre. That sounds to me like it is the
Well, it's
best just transition
yeah,
example
exactly.
you could have.
Yeah, exactly. Because we don't want these companies that have built up the infrastructure to create energy. It's in nobody's interest that these companies go under. What we
Mm,
want them to do is to seize the infrastructure they've got and convert to solar and wind and deliver energy free of pollution, actually free of charge ultimately, because it's a
mm.
renewable source of energy. So yeah,
Partner with
look,
the planet instead
yeah,
of just partner with the business side of things. You
yeah.
can actually do both.
100%. So,
Wow.
there are some really easy low-hanging fruit projects that should get the go ahead.
Why
Um,
would something like that be stopped?
yeah,
I'm not politicizing this, but it's
no,
actually just confounding. So, do we
no.
know?
Look, it unfortunately, there are some politicians that come along every now and again that are hell bent on just keeping fossil fuels going. And unfortunately, ScoMo, as we called him, was one of those politicians. One of his chief advisors was a former
Mm,
coal industry executive, or at least had quite a senior role there in the coal industry. So, look, different politicians get different advice all the time, and unfortunately, um, some of them get their own ideas as well. Like the US president at the moment has got is this idea that climate change is a hoax. It's really hard to change people's views once they get set, unfortunately.
yeah. Well, that's
But
why I wanted to invite you on because I know there are a lot of people who, armed with the facts, go, oh, okay. And I've actually heard it from a source and I've heard it from a good enough interviewer who can challenge things and dig enough so that it's not just a blanket statement and then we move on, but it's like, hey, but why? But why? But how does that happen? Like, I want
mm,
us to get to the point where we really get it at a basic level.
yeah, and it's I think it's becoming less easy to deny the basic climate change
Mm,
facts. So look, we're making progress, but to see elections, um, to see this politicized still as an issue is challenging and confronting to me because I'm all for a debate about how we solve it. What's the best solution, and that's not my field. It's more
mm,
I'm more like the guy who comes along and says, "Look, here's a problem. It's going to be costly if we don't fix it." But
mm,
it's that sector that devise how we, power transport, how we create energy for households and businesses to do what we need to do as societies. It's that community that needs to have the debate about how we solve it. And when I say debate, it needs to be constructive and not politicized, because again, that can get hijacked as well. People
mm.
with vested interests. So yeah.
Agreed. And I was thinking about this the other day when I saw an article and, a big sensationalist headline. I can't remember whether it was a Labor one or a Liberal one now, but it was something because they've both done it. But it was something like a hung parliament is an ineffective parliament.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I just feel like we've actually got a golden opportunity here to bring a much bigger variety of diversity of voice and
Yeah.
community voice because of that independent movement to really make sure we are debating like very, very thoroughly before we decide how to move forward. And the
Yeah.
more diversity, the more you actually have to bring experts in to present to Parliament. And commission things, and everyone really has to look at the data instead of looking at who their donors are and
Yeah.
keeping people happy that way. We just can't go the way of America because we've seen where that's landed us, and this is actually golden for us. I think there's a really great opportunity in this new diversity.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny to say that a hung parliament's an ineffective one because in a way it's just one that's held to account more.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's was a good outcome of the last election. A lot of seats that actually went to the pro climate change action uh, candidates, those
Mm.
candidates who are pushing for climate change action, the seats that tended to go to that vote were often seats that had, like in the Brisbane region, they'd been hit by catastrophic floods for a couple of summers in a row,
Oh,
and so
100%.
to me it was amazing to see some of these areas. You know, it's as though being subjected to a climate extreme really woke up people to thinking we've got to deal with this problem. So any candidate who was part of a party that was denying there was a problem, those Teals, I think, got a big leg up because voters saw, a push for inaction from a party they might normally have voted for, and they decided to switch their vote. And I think you're right. I
Mm.
think it's a system we're lucky enough to have here because I think it does lead to a greater chance of addressing an issue like climate change than if we have.
Yeah. And I feel like it helps us as a country remember that we all want a healthy planet,
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah.
what side you might choose
No,
politics
that's
on
true.
for a number of other issues. The healthy planet part, like that benefits us all.
Yeah.
And then healthy conversations about transition in mining towns and making sure people are looked after. Like that's all a part of it. No one wants anyone to fail. And like you said, like big guys going out of business is
Yeah.
not ideal for the economy either. So
No, that's right.
yeah, absolutely. And something I learned the other day, which I thought was interesting because I was doing a bit of research on my own electorate, and we have an election coming, and there's a funding body, Climate 200, that I was looking into because I thought, is this just a rich, billionaire trying to capitalize on the teal movement for their own benefit, And then I found out the person who shall remain nameless, who founded Climate 200, is actually only responsible for 10% of its funding. The rest
Right.
comes from
Yeah.
everyday Aussies going, I really care about having a healthy planet for the future of my kids. I'll donate something.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic to note. Like, this is why we all have to do due diligence on things because I was even surprised by my own, oh, it's probably just, another over corporatized, renewables person. But and it's not that I don't believe in renewables, by the way. I just want to make sure
Nobody's
we're not
conflicted,
just
basically.
passing from one vested interest to
Yeah.
another, and we try and keep things really transparent.
Yeah.
And
And sometimes
so,
those
yeah.
sometimes those wealthy donors get targeted, but if you look at the proportion of their wealth and what they're giving, it may be less than somebody who's donating, who's
Mm,
just on a regular income.
yeah.
So it's all proportional. And I don't know if we've seen the fossil fuel sector pump huge amounts of money into political parties. If the
Mm.
climate change
Can't they
action,
throw a few million at it? Like, look,
yeah,
it's still going to be a drop in the ocean compared to, yes, other people. I
yeah,
agree. Okay. So, a little off track there. I want to come back to the ocean and talk about the actual impact to the ocean of all this, because we kind of started there and then moved to temperature and rain. What do we see happening by the ocean actually fundamentally losing its ability to function effectively?
well, I mean, yeah, in a way, the ocean's always going to be there. It's going to always do its
Mm,
thing, and there'll be waves and there'll be ocean currents and so on. But it's just that they're changing in such a way that it's disruptive to ecosystems in our climate system. We didn't talk about it yet, but this overturning, so the people hear about the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation maybe reaching a tipping point, and we have our own overturning circulation off Antarctica. But those overturning circulations are where water at the surface sinks to the very bottom of the ocean, then eventually recirculates And I'm not talking about just, off the beach and doing a little loop back onto the shore. This is water around Antarctica and off Greenland, sinking to the very deepest parts of the ocean globally and then gradually
Mm.
resurfacing. It's like having an aquarium that has the water overturning right across the size of your aquarium, which you need for the aquarium to stay healthy. Those water pumps, bring oxygen obviously into the water, but they also move the water around, and that movement of water, the lack of stagnation, is what keeps an aquarium healthy. And same thing for our oceans. We don't want them to stagnate. If you warm them at the surface, you basically what we call stratify them. It means that the surface layer floats a lot and sits at the surface undisturbed, and you can actually slow down this overturning circulation. So that's one thing we didn't talk about yet, but it's a way that the
Mm.
oceans can change in a
Is this
very
how more
profound way.
algae ends up growing in the sea?
Well, it's important for like the water that's brought back up to the surface is nutrient rich, so it does support algae, like the sort of
Mm.
phytoplankton, the very base of the food chain is made healthier by having this nutrient-rich water come back up to the surface. So
Yeah.
it's all about having a healthy oceans, and if we stagnate those oceans and stagnate the circulation, it means that ecosystems are deprived of that source of nutrients from the deeper ocean.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what does that look like for the ability for fish to reproduce and populations to be healthy, us to be able to continue to fish responsibly?
Yeah.
What's the future look like there?
Yeah, it's taking away a source of nutrient rich water at the surface. There's still ways that the ocean circulates nutrients in the surface. So it's not like we lose all nutrients from the surface layers, but we'd be cutting off a major source. There was a study a few years ago that estimated, about a 30% reduction in net primary productivity. That's to say the amount of fish stock in at the surface of the ocean by cutting off this overturning circulation. So it's a significant drop in the nutrient availability if we cut off these overturning circulations.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Solutions for us for every day. I don't love putting it on us because I think there's a much bigger fish to fry, pardon the pun, given the
Yeah.
subject. But is there anything we can do? I'm really conscious of conversations now, ensuring that if we are talking about something heavy, intense, not beneficial to
Yeah.
any of us, what is the action piece? Is it about writing letters, calling MPs, saying, where are you on this and what are you doing about it? So that they know. No one's telepathic, right? But if you make enough noise, I just feel like we're making too much noise on social comment threads, fighting each other about things we don't understand half the time,
Yeah.
and not enough thinking, okay, future of my family, what do I care about? Have I actually called my local politician?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I agree with you. I sort of struggle with putting it onto individuals, but there is a lot of groundswell of change that does start with a collection of individuals agitating for that change. So I think a lot of things you spoke about are really worthwhile. By all, write to your MPs, let them know it matters to you. Voting clearly, how people vote is really important. If you think about, often the main political parties agree on 90% of things, right? And then they
Mm.
disagree on a tiny fraction. If they're disagreeing on climate action, you know, vote vote to with the party that happens to be pushing for that climate action. In the UK, it became apolitical because the three
Yeah,
major
which I think
parties,
is fantastic.
yeah,
It's like,
they
it's
said we're not
this,
going to debate this anymore. We agree
yeah.
climate change is happening. This is no longer a political um, argument point between Tories and the Labour Party, and I think the Greens
Mm.
and others kicked in as well. So yeah, it was fantastic. And back to individual action, people can get off the grid as well. Like I know it sounds like, can you do that really? Get off the grid? Well, you can. And I know, a lot of people renting places, it's hard to do in that situation, but um, the actual, I mean, but if you are renting, if there's any, again, such a crunch on finding rentals now, so it's hard. But any homeowner should have solar on their roof. Um, get a battery as well, and you can actually, you can pay for those two systems in just, depends how high your power bill is, but you can actually fully cover the costs of solar plus storage, which can deliver all your energy needs and more. And you get, buyback depending on the household and your energy bill. It can be between as little as 3 years.
Mm.
Maybe it's 5 or 6 for others, but that time scale used to be more like 20 years.
Yeah.
So you're getting cost positive outcomes for going to greenhouse gas free energy in households.
Mm. And do you have visibility, Matt, on renewables and the things that go into making batteries, different minerals and metals? Because there is concern, and I feel like we don't get to see experts of this field talking direct to populations. So we
Yeah,
do end up again then just listening to people hashing their opinions out on podcasts. And
yeah,
I figured while you're here, if you can actually share some visibility on safety, human rights concerns in that
yeah,
area, and finite resource concerns,
yeah.
where are we at on renewable technology now?
Yeah, so it is not my field, but I do have close colleagues who work in that area.
Might need to send me
Pro-
someone that I can
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
on the
Well,
show. Yeah.
Professor Martin Green is one of the world's leading solar scientists. Been working in the field for 40 or 50 years even. He's
Mm.
amazing scientist. And he gave an amazing talk I saw at UNSW a couple of years back where he showed that the actual, if you ever hear the mining sector say they're going to be ruined by climate action, nothing could be further from the truth because we need silicates and lithium and copper and a whole bunch of metals are needed. The mining industry will thrive under a push for renewables. We're not going to be digging up coal anymore or looking for gas, but we definitely need those metals and minerals to produce solar cells. My understanding is that there's plenty to produce the solar needs that the world has, but it does need an expansion of mining in some of those areas.
Mm.
So yeah, mining always creates issues with traditional owners of land sometimes being shut out of the profits of that extraction or damaging the environment. So it does raise new issues where um, you know expanding across the planet with an ever-growing population with energy needs to produce the power it takes to stay warm or stay cool or produce food or
Mm.
whatever. So, or move products around to grow food in one place and transport it somewhere else. So, unfortunately, our energy needs aren't going away, and a big factor in getting people out of poverty is to provide them with energy. So, in a way, we want energy provision globally to ensure people have well-being, but we need to do it without the heavy carbon emission tag. A lovely line from the Al Gore movie, which I think was a quote by somebody else anyway, but I don't know the original
Mm.
or person who made this comment, but the Stone Age did not end because they ran out of stones, and for sure we don't need to run out of coal before we abandon it because it's so damaging to our atmosphere and to our climate system. Um, that yeah, we can provide global energy with much lower emissions technologies, and that's what should be rolled out globally, and it will create businesses and jobs and a new economy and well-being.
And then recycling plants off the back of that
Exactly.
to keep using things.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
What keeps you up at night? Last question. As a
Um,
scientist in this
yeah.
field, what's
Look,
your current, like, geez, if we could just.
yeah, I think the biggest concern I have is just this brazen sense that we can keep extracting hydrocarbons, coal, oil, gas, that there's a sort of, let's just keep going with this. That's definitely the biggest concern I have. I don't have any concern about solving the problem in the sense that we've got the technologies available. Business gets momentum very quickly, and it delivers products when they're needed. I mean, virtually nobody on the planet's not walking around with a phone. It's just ridiculous to me to see the rollout of that technology. Um, likewise, to these new technologies in energy production can be rolled out globally. But the concern that I have is this ongoing extraction of carbon-rich sources of energy, burning them, and that our atmospheric carbon dioxide is just going to keep going up and up at such a rate that we have hugely costly events and new solutions come on board, like browning the sky with sulfate aerosols. There's
Which,
other,
my
yeah,
gosh, that just has a whole other ramification, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. And you
Mm.
don't get away from the acidifying oceans. I mean, if you're getting up with CO2 level, carbon dioxide levels going high, you don't get away from that acidification problem in the ocean. So it's not a solution. It's also a very costly solution to have jumbo jets flying around, basically adding pollution to the atmosphere
Mm.
high up and creating a shield,
Let's save
abandoned.
that for visiting your auntie at Christmas once
Yeah,
every couple of
exactly.
years instead.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's much better ways to do things. Matt, I just can't thank you enough for your time. I feel like we really got to places that couldn't have made the situation clearer with your brilliant expertise, but your ability to just keep it real and explain it in a way that us lowly creatures can actually understand it. So thank you
No,
so
Alex,
much for joining us.
absolute pleasure. And none of you are lowly creatures. You're all absolutely wonderful people trying to
We all
engage on the
care,
topic.
so it
Yeah,
just helps when we get to actually hear it from the horse's mouth. So I really, really appreciate it.
no, absolute pleasure. Thanks, Alex.
I hope you loved today's show as much as I loved bringing it to you. I want to remind you that if you are someone who craves a low tox community that is judgment free, full of empowerment, has health professionals and building health professionals that can support you, as well as me in there answering questions multiple times a week, I want to invite you to join the Low Tox Club. For the price of less than a cup of coffee a month, you have an annual membership for $49 Australian, so it's about $30 US or euro, that allows you to have a member masterclass every single month with a health professional or global expert from the podcast, where we have them to ourselves for an hour to ask questions and deep dive further. You have the beautiful supportive chat group. You have Q&As with me answering questions. We read books and talk about them, and a whole bunch more. You can head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the Explore tab, and join the club is the very first option on that list. Of course, we have over 10 evergreen courses that you can jump into anytime, whether it's navigating everyday low tox swaps with our Go Low Tox signature course, whether you have kids and you're wanting to know how to best support them with our Low Tox Kids course, whether you're planning a family and looking at a healthy low tox preconception journey, reducing inflammation, especially the chronic kind, with our Inflammation Ninja course, many other courses. You can again head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the courses tab, and you'll see all of the options, which includes a business course, my Low Tox Method program. A lot of people don't know, but I was doing a lot before starting Low Tox Life in 2009, and I was a business consultant across hospitality, health, retail, and cosmetics. I have been in business consulting for a very long time, so I absolutely adore helping people move into the low tox space or develop their low tox businesses. So that's a way I can support you. And then, of course, there's our wonderful social media communities at Low Tox Life on Instagram, and of course, the website with over 250 gluten-free recipes, blogs, downloadable PDFs to help you navigate wanting to get rid of synthetic fragrances in your school or office. I could go on. So head to lowtoxlife.com, see what takes your interest or fancy, and thank you so much for being a part of our podcast community. I love reading your reviews. I appreciate every follow and subscribe, and I want to just remind you to finish off that if there's anything you heard that you found interesting from a medical or scientific perspective, it is intended as education only. Please always chat to a health professional who knows you and your situation best. I'll see you next week. Bye.